What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be doing a viewer requested video regarding the preseason in Madden, and specifically today I'm going to be addressing the comment from Joe here on YouTube. He left this comment a while back in March, I believe it was, on how I play my preseason games, how I manage my depth charts and roster and things like that whenever I go through preseason. So we're going to go ahead and address that stuff today so that you guys get a good feel for how we manage it and my tips and tricks for it. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, the first thing that I want to point out to you guys is in a majority of my leagues, what we do end up doing is we allow 1 day in order to play preseason games. So, for example, if we are in a 2-day advanced league, we advance every 2 days, we allow 1 day to play a preseason game for each preseason week. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that, because just because some users don't want to play preseason or some users and teams might have their team set doesn't mean that everybody does. You're always going to have bottom feeders. You're always going to have top of the league teams. You're always going to have guys that are looking to find stars on their team. And within Madden, we know that I've discussed how many times that there are things that go on behind the scenes that affect the way players play. So it is beneficial a lot of the times, especially if you don't already have an OP team, to go in and play some players, try some players out, and give them an opportunity to play games. So we do 1 day advances. I think that's about as short as you can go for preseason, or you can do, maybe 1 day per 2 preseason weeks or something like that, giving people an opportunity to at least go in and play those games if they want to. And then on preseason week 4, we make sure that we have a hard stop and give everybody the opportunity to re-sign, or not re-sign, but sign their players to the practice squad, because during preseason a lot of people load up their rosters, and that's the next thing I'll talk about, so that they can try guys out, and then they have to cut down their roster and put players on their practice squad, and it's not available for you to put players on the practice squad until preseason week 4. So you guys can see I just loaded up this franchise, and I am currently at 70 out of 75 players on the roster. That is something that I will do within free agency, I'll go in and load up the roster through what's available in free agency as soon as the draft is done or anything like that. The first thing that I'll do, I will go in and load players up at position of need, and I will go ahead and sign players to my team. Young guys, I'll specifically sort by age within here. I'll sort by positions that I need. Maybe I want to try a couple of young quarterbacks out or something like that. I'll go in and sign those guys. But the key here is you want to load up your roster, but you only want to load up rosters at positions that you can focus on. So, you can't necessarily focus on every single position. I'm sure you can try guys out at every position, but it's going to be hard to watch because these guys are going to be getting very limited playing time within the preseason. So what you want to do is you really want to focus on the positions of need for your team. If you know that you don't need a quarterback, then don't worry about signing young quarterbacks to compete. If you know you don't need a halfback, then don't worry about signing young halfbacks to compete. But let's say I need a wide receiver. I don't have anybody that can catch the football. I don't have any offensive linemen that can block. I should be focusing on bringing those positions in to see how those players play. That's the most crucial part in terms of filling your roster up. And then you also have to consider how many quarters these players can play. So the next thing to talk about here is how many quarters can these guys actually play? Well, if you don't want to go into the point of micromanaging where you are subbing guys in and out every quarter, you're basically going to get a half of the game with one side of the team and a half a game with the other side of the team, the first string and the second string. So that's the best way to go about it, is between games, sub them out, between strings. And so let's say, for example, that we wanted to try out quarterbacks. Well, I would sign probably 4 quarterbacks to the roster. I'd give one guy one half of the game and another guy another half of the game, and I would then eliminate one of those 2 players from the roster after that week. Now, you can do it this way. Sometimes what I will do is in the next game, I will take my next 2 quarterbacks who didn't play in week 1, and I will play one guy in the first half of the game and the second guy in the second half of the game. And then out of the performances of those 4 players, I would eliminate 1 or 2 players. You can do this various different ways. A lot of times what I actually do is I give them a quarter at a time, because when you're trying out young quarterbacks, you need to see their arm. In Madden, you really only need a quarter of play to tell how those guys play, because the quarterback's going to be getting the ball every play. The halfback's going to be getting the ball every time you hand it off to him. Whereas there might be some positions like receivers or linebackers or things like that where you might need to give them a half, you might need to give them 3/4 to really get a good feel for how that player is going to play. But for primary positions, you can run through them quickly. And this is what I do, especially with quarterbacks, with halfbacks, and things of that nature. I'll sign 4 guys. I'll give each of them maybe a quarter in the first game because I will go through the effort of manually subbing them out. And then I'll eliminate them as I go through the game. You know, if this guy doesn't run the way that I want my running back to run, you're out. Sorry, you're cut after the next game. Maybe I pick somebody else up to bring in to compete, but I run those guys until I find somebody that I like. That's pretty much how I run through my roster through preseason, and that's kind of a way that I would suggest that you guys do it as well. So again, just to give you guys a demonstration of that, let's say I was trying out quarterbacks here. I knew I was going to keep Ben Roethlisberger on the roster. Okay, then don't give him, the veteran quarterback, any playing time within preseason. It's just simply not worth it. So make sure that you have your depth chart set so that Dwayne Haskins is number 1, Josh Dobbs is number 2, and to be honest with you, I have 4 young quarterbacks here. If one of these guys plays poorly, that guy's out. I cut him after that game, and then the next guy comes in and gets reps. Let's say I like the way Dwayne Haskins played. I'm going to keep him around, and then I'm going to give these guys reps. And if I don't like one of the ways that these guys play, then they're cut. So let's say Josh Dobbs performed poorly in game 1, he's out. Let's say Steven Montez performed poorly in game 2, he's out, you know, in their quarters that they played. And then what I do in week 3 or week 4 is I pit these guys against each other. So I've eliminated 2 guys within week 1 and week 2, and I've now determined who my top 2 candidates are. I pit these guys against each other, and I say, okay, well, if I only want to keep 2 quarterbacks on the roster, who's going to play well? And then the one that plays well sticks around. The one that doesn't gets cut for week 4. And what I do in week 4 of preseason is I play my starter, and then I play my backup. This is a really good philosophy to have within your organization whenever you're trying to go through preseason, if you're actually going to put in the effort to play these games and determine who should start or who should have a job on your team. So what I do then, like I said in week 4, is I'm going to play the starter, and then I'm going to play the backup, and I'm going to compare those two because, you know, the veteran or whatever. And if I don't have a veteran, then you just go through a similar process of giving them competitive reps against each other and seeing who comes out victorious. And so from a quarterback perspective here with the Steelers, I would say, okay, I know Ben Roethlisberger is my cemented starter. Now what I'm going to do in preseason week 4 is I'm going to give each of them a half of the game, or I'm going to give maybe Ben Roethlisberger a quarter and Dwayne Haskins 3/4, and I'm going to see what Dwayne Haskins can do to try to match Roethlisberger's performance. Now, he may match it, he may not match it, but, you know, ultimately it's going to give you a good picture of whether this guy is worth keeping around long term. And you can do the same thing with any other position. You know, I can give guys a quarter of play, I can give guys certain reps, and I can rotate them in and see how they play and then decide to cut them from there. It's the same thing with pretty much every single position, and I cut down from the beginning of preseason as I go. Now, the other thing to note is that as I advance through preseason, what's going to happen is other teams are going to cut players. So if I advance to preseason week 2, players are going to get cut, you know, and I'm going to cut players. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into preseason, I'm going to do a quick browse to see if there's anybody out there that, you know, maybe a young player got cut that's worth, you know, my time now. Maybe DeAndre Walker's worth my time. I don't know if he was there before or not. So I'm going to go ahead and look for those things. But what is especially important whenever you're managing these games, so I've already given you my strategy in terms of how I cut down and how I give playing time and stuff like that. What's the most important thing here when I go through preseason, outside of training and stuff like that, is when you hit preseason week 4 is when everybody has to put players on their practice squad. Now, why is this important in preseason week 4? Well, this is important because that means that the CPU teams had to cut down their rosters. And you can see now that I've gone to preseason week 4, you're going to see a lot of good players out here in free agency, especially if you're playing in a league with CPU teams. Even if you're playing in a league with user teams, they have to cut their roster down by the end of this week. And so this is when you want to go in and look for players. You guys can see when I sorted by age before, there wasn't much, but now I could pick up a 23-year-old 76 6 overall cornerback and add this guy to my team. Now, the obvious problem here with this is once you do this, you're probably not going to have much opportunity to try these guys out and give them opportunities to play. So you're obviously putting yourself at a bit of an unknown or a bit of a risk there with what you're doing. But your entire process leading up to this was to find players that can fit what you want to do and fit your team, and by week 4 you should pretty much have that set for the most part. You might have a couple of battles going into preseason week 4 and stuff like that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you should be pretty set, and you should probably be pretty comfortable with your roster at this point building up to preseason week 4. And once you get here, to add another player or two that might be able to try out in regular season week 1 or might be able to try out in preseason week 4 is not going to be that big of a deal. But that's how I manage preseason. I try to give guys 1 quarter of play at most of the major positions. Sometimes, like I said, with linebackers and defensive backs, you really kind of need to get 2 quarters, 3 quarters, maybe a game to see how they're going to play, but I do eliminate as I go. I try to fill my roster up as much as I can. You guys can see I have 70 players right here, and then I try to cut it down to 53 and keep the best alternates on my practice squad so they can stick around and fill positions for injury and stuff like that. So hopefully that answers your question. I know that was a viewer requested video, but you know, something that I have like a backlog of viewer requested videos that I want to get to and make sure that I address. So, you know, something that was worthwhile. Hopefully this information was at least useful to somebody. I know a lot of people don't even care about preseason, but it is what it is. I hope that this video was helpful, and if it was, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment down below with anything you'd like to see next. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.